percentage of transnational corporations that used to operate in 1970s. And actually very many of the ideas that are now championed by the OECD were developed first by the UNCCC. So there's this kind of an interesting situation where actually where the UN is kind of challenging OECD, but in fact UN was the one that first invented, for example, automatic information exchange and country-by-country reporting and so on. Thanks.
Hi, Stephen Dean from Open Law School. The question I had for whoever wants to actually I was curious what the current thinking was on if you were to adopt formula apportionment, what the right formula would be, what the allocation would be based on, pure sales, something more nuanced. Certainly from the developing perspective, I'm curious what is doing.
Okay, well, I'm going to just take Professor Dean's question. So before we get to formulary apportionment, can we please talk about global consolidation? Because I think that's the itch to go straight to, well, what's the formula going to be? Nobody can agree on it, so let's just stop talking about it. So, not to say that that's what you're saying, but I want to talk about global consolidation because I think sources of not only corporate tax avoidance, but personal tax avoidance, private equity, the channels of private equity, and all the different special entity vehicles that are not necessarily corporate, and also the illicit side, the illegal side as well, take advantage of this divide and hide system that we have throughout the globe. So divide, I mean the separate entity system, the fact that you can create thousands of different subsidiaries under one corporate umbrella and use them for different purposes, maybe valid business purposes, but you're all controlling it centrally. So I think that's the first step. And that's the issue we need to focus on in terms of finding solutions to this mammoth problem of why money is flowing out of the places that need it most. So once we have it all together, right, we've consolidated everything, and you have to pick the principal unitary consolidation at the corporate level. So it's not, easy peasy. But once you get it together, then you're right. We have to figure out how to share it and divide it back up again between where these economic activities are taking place. So the Commission discussed this issue at length and heard from different experts. And what they came up with is, regardless of what factors you choose, they need to reflect both the residence and the source country priorities. It can't just be one-sided. So a one-sided residence country factor would be sales. And that is the trend in the United States. The states of the United States, we're all allowed to have our own formulas, right? Because we like that, uniqueness. We're a laboratory. But Canada, the provinces of Canada, they got it together and said we're going to have a uniform formula, but they kept with the separate entity system. So that's an interesting experiment. But what Canada has, their uniform formula, is sales and payroll. So they're reflecting both the consumption side of economic activity as well as the production side of economic activity. The EU in the CCCTB, the formula that, the most recent formula, is to have something on sales, something on assets, but also a split between employment by payroll, wage levels, but also employment by headcount. Because you're dealing with the wage levels between, say, the UK and Greece, which there's a vast divide. And you think in terms of like the wage levels in the UK versus China or India. So there has to be some fairness in the allocation of the tax base. And so the formula factors would be the negotiated result of countries coming together to say, these are what factors would work for us, let's find a compromise. Yes, if it were a sales-only factor, it would hurt developing economies. And that's a big criticism. No one's denying that. It would hurt states without big markets. However, when you compromise and all the countries think about factors that would work for their particular economic situation, if that negotiation could happen, and there could be agreement on a formula with factors, then it could be a very efficient and equitable division of the corporate tax base at the global level. But it's a long-term goal, right? But that's what we're here for.
Well, first on this right to invest where you want to invest, right? It's not a very pervasive discussion. If you ask me, it comes from a lot of people who do a lot of economic thinking. But what I found interesting about the 2011 Icelandic paper is that it's a very sophisticated argument. I mean, more sophisticated, I don't know, I mean, you said it doesn't hold a lot of water, but the argument is the following, that there is a commitment in the EU about the right to emigrate, okay, the right to move from one country to the other, and they said the capital controls that Iceland imposed, because it will delay the ability of that emigrant to move his assets where he wants to move, it violates his right to immigrate within the EU, right? So, but it's not a very pervasive argument. Basically, go ahead.
Yeah. Can I, so that seems to be a fallacy.
Just so everyone knows.
It doesn't follow from the fact that you have a right to move, that you have the right to move all kinds of assets with you. So at most, you may have some instrumental argument for saying that the person can carry some kind of physical possessions with him. He may carry a certain amount of funds that are necessary to create some kind of minimal, recreate a system of living where he is, where he or she are planning to go to. But it doesn't follow from this that generally your right to invest any kinds of funds in any kind of endeavor is a violation of your human right. Even before we get to the very obvious questions about if I want to invest in child prostitution, that seems to be my investment itself is a violation of human rights, rather than the law coming to me and say, no, that's a point, you can't do that, right? So it just seems like an extremely non sequitur kind of argument. And I'm not attacking you, obviously.
No, I'm talking to a department which is a philosophy department, right? Don't worry about these kinds of arguments. All I'm saying is that there are arguments that exist along these lines, right?
All I'm saying is that you should tell the Islamic folks they're wrong.
You asked about the TNCs and the...
Yeah, it was more of a comment.
Yeah, it was really a comment. The other thing that's true is actually the League of Nations was the original location of international tax cooperation, right? Which was the precursor theoretically of the UN. And in 1947, there was a official committee that was formed in the UN, right? So the UN actually has, think about the Millennium Development Goals. All of a sudden, it's a World Bank agenda, right? These kinds of things only get decided in the UN when you have a more open discussion, right? You don't worry about the commercial impact first before you decide about how do you want to address a problem. So it's a good comment, right? On the formulary apportionment, I think Erica has talked a lot about it, but in general, what actually happens here is that, I mean, the people who are doing research in this come after the committee in this way. The way I look at it is that it's an ultimate way in which taxes on companies that operate in more than one jurisdiction have to be undertaken, right? It can be undertaken in many, many ways, right? It can be undertaken within a national jurisdiction, and even within that there are problems, right? It will be very difficult to do it internationally. But my view of this is that if we put it up there as an idea, it is something that developing countries can fight for and try to do in a unilateral, almost or regional way, right? In a way in which they can find ways in which the formula can actually be feasible and not completely easy to do it. But I mean, we understand the problems of it. See, the problem is that we open ourselves to the people who say it doesn't work and all that stuff. But the imagination is more important, right? And the ability to mobilize politics for this kind of thinking, in which we are saying that it is not hard to decide who are related companies, right? If this company is related to that company, this company, and the first thing you want to ask is to disclose all of the companies that are subsidiaries all around the world, and then to think of ways in which you could tax the income that is generated from all of those related companies.
So thank you for the questions. They're all good questions, and I'll try to get through them quickly. The OECD declared that the era of tax secrecy was over in 2011. And I think BEPS proves that the OECD countries are the culprits, not the police, of what is a tax haven. So for me, the evidence is very clear. If you weren't a tax haven, you wouldn't have BEPS. So we can talk about that some more later. But I'm very critical of the OECD claiming that anyone not in the OECD is a tax haven, but anyone in the OECD is not. I think that claim is unsupportable in any case, and isn't borne out by its own subsequent history. The residual tax rate in treaties is a very interesting point that you bring up. And in fact, in the new U.S. Model Tax Treaty, there's a provision called special tax regimes and subsequent changes in law. And basically what the U.S. is saying is if we have a contract with you, a tax treaty with you, and you change your law, you reduce your tax in your country, then the treaty's off. And so this is a very interesting new development, and I think containing a deal where you allocate, not only can you use the treaty to allocate more source country tax, but you can use the treaty to insist that that tax gets imposed and collected, is radical, a radical departure from prior tax treaties. So I'm with Erica in that I almost think that it was a mistake for many countries to enter into tax treaties on the old model, but if this was the new model, is there room for a different kind of a tax treaty which is more cooperative? Yes, I think so, but is it going to materialize? I doubt it, for all kinds of reasons that don't have to do with whether it's a good idea. And then, so Stephen, Professor Dean, on your question about formula apportionment, my sense of the problem is sort of captured in the Acer CEO's the smile curve. Does anyone know what the smile curve is? The smile curve is a CEO's vision of where the value in a product is placed along the chain of things that go into creating that product or good in the corporation. And the problem is that most of the value in a good, like the phone, is branding, marketing, design and development, which is in global north countries. And on the other end, distribution, advertising, promotion, which is, again, high value, and again, is in the global north countries. And manufacturing is at the bottom of the curve. They call it a smile curve because the value is high at the front end, drops down to manufacturing, and then rises back up. So if you use formulary apportionment, then doesn't that mean that who gets the smallest end of the stick? Why, it will be the developing countries who are actually making these things. They're at the manufacturing stage. So formulary apportionment, we run into some problem if we're going to allocate the value of a company according to what actually produced the value. Developed countries are going to have a much higher claim based on the business model of what creates value. That seems like a big problem. And then I would just add to that I don't know if allocating solves the competition problem. Because if you allocate, then the source country is not incentivized not to tax their share. That's allocated to them, that doesn't mean they're incentivized to tax it. So I think we have to solve those problems. I don't know how to solve those problems. I think those are tough problems. But I think a lot of it goes exactly to the question you asked, which is what's the formula? And then I have some thoughts on the investment, right, but I'll leave those till later because I know we're ahead of time.
So we now have 3 final comments, and because time is short, I'll ask for short interventions, and then each of our panelists can offer some final words or response. So the people who have already indicated they wanted to speak are you, Sir, you, and were you indicated? Yeah, I thought you were. Okay, so the 3.
So just one comment and one question, if I could. 2 questions, actually. They'll just be a short question. The comment is just about what's your provocation, I think it was, about the right to invest. It is a provocation, and that particular argument maybe stands on stilts, but the power to interpret what human rights are depends on the body doing it. And there are some particular bodies which are quite conservative. The European Court of Human Rights is a banker's body in many regards. It upholds the rights of bondholders, it upholds the rights of very wealthy individuals many times, under the Article on Right to Property. That's a problem because all of the other human rights involved in that convention, the European Convention on Human Rights, are being pushed aside. There are also cases of constitutional courts, in particular in Central America, which have deemed illegal and unconstitutional certain progressive tax reforms. So there is a trend, an unfortunate trend, to certain bodies taking conservative positions and using human rights, appropriating human rights to undermine progressive reforms. On the other hand, the good news is, over the past 10 years, there's been really an explosion of the opposite effect. Of constitutional courts, regional bodies, international bodies, taking taxes as their own. And the good thing is that, for the most part, the international treaty bodies, the regional commissions like the Council of Europe, the Inter-American Commission, others, they're the guardians of what human rights are. They're the ones, in general, that are able to interpret in an authoritative way what human rights is. And they are all saying that there's a need for progressive reforms and a need for international tax cooperation, not competition. So the questions are a bit more technical. Sorry, tax inversions, is that a problem for residual tax? The residual tax idea, in other words, moving headquarters overseas. And then second, shouldn't the formula apportionment depend on the sector? Because different sectors have different value added.
I'm Juan Pablo Bohlaki. I'm UN independent expert on foreign debt and human rights. I sent to Zambia a request to do a contribution. So I find your discussion extremely helpful and interesting. So the Zambian political system led this to happen. So it seems to me a rational behavior in light of the benefits that elites get from this structure. So my question is, how will you approach the Zambian political system with your proposals?
Yeah, hi. My name is Taz Chapanda, Yale World Fellow. I guess, yeah, so just a more practical question, which is, to what extent are African governments or developing country governments taking this issue up of the sort of tax fairness? It's fairly technical issues we're looking at. So are there resources available, to support governments who want to engage with multinational corporations? I'm from Malawi, which is a fairly small bureaucracy, not very strong technically. And the reality is that if a big multinational company comes along and says, look, we want to invest, we'll put up our hand really quickly. So what I'm asking really is, for these small governments who don't have very many options, is there technical capacity available for them so that they can tap into this to sort of even the scales?
Really quick. Formulary apportionment, all those things on the smile, people are doing them. People are designing, people are developing, people are marketing, people are manufacturing, and people are buying. So if we construct the factors based on what the people are doing and where those people are, we will get very far on a just formula. Secondly, the issue of how we deal with the elites. We strengthen civil society in country to hold their own leaders accountable. Because you're right, all the technical and all the good suggestions, and they get nowhere if you have an elite class that wants a dysfunctional system because it's benefiting them. And so what I have seen is the only way out of that is to strengthen people in their own country to hold their own leaders accountable to do what's right. So, but, the proposals need to be presented. And that's why groups like the regional tax administrations are very important. And the UN Tax Committee works on building capacity to give these, technical solutions in the hands of the administrators. But the problem is they're just administrators. They're not the political elites. So we have to work from both directions. And the civil society folks in the North need to put pressure on their own governments not to play the system and exploit the weaknesses available to protect their own multinationals.
Well, this thing about the human rights provocation, right? Sometimes I feel guilty because I've been a teacher of economics, and our model of economics is atomistic individuals or independent. And anything social that happens is the voluntary act of individuals that come to the market, right? I mean, I don't need anybody else. And in effect, then if you marry this to human rights, that means that I have absolute power over the resources that I have, right? I don't even, so in a sense, the standard economics model doesn't even have children, right? Children cannot take care of themselves when they're very young, right? Theoretically, you know, as Hajun Chang once joked that, you know, you should let your child go out and sell cigarettes in the streets the moment he can walk and all that stuff, right? So in effect, the standard economics model is very much related to this atomistic approach, right? Now on the formula apportionment and the SMILE, right? I find it very dangerous the way the formulation is done by saying, well, first of all, we manage in the FFD negotiations to say corporations should pay taxes according to where their activities are, right? And then the OECD formulation is not just that; it says, and where value is added, right? So in effect, this is the OECD protecting itself by putting it into the outcome document, you know, believing in the SMILE, right? That they also want to capture taxes on the both ends. What I wanted to do, as we tried to say, is take out that phrase, right, about where value is added, because you know all of the other ways in which you can undertake formulary assessment, including head count of employees, will even the playing field of deciding how to undertake formulary assessment. I agree very much with Erica about, for example, we might call the Zambian problem. One thing that is actually clear, and this is, you know, Raymond can actually might be able to confirm this or affirm this, that the illicit financial flows project in Africa is a very alive project, right? They have managed to bring in the ATAC, you know, the African Tax Administrators Forum, which has a lot of expertise, and there is a lot of expertise that's come from it. Of course, it doesn't say that, I'm not saying that the resources are enough, right? And also our own, the South Center is actually interested in helping out, really providing the technical support. But at the end of the day, it's really the citizens that are responsible, right? What we always say is that this sustainable development goals, right? Why do we have to promise them to the UN, right? These are in the first place promises of our own politicians to us, you know, to their constituencies in the developing countries, right? And if they don't meet these promises, they should be thrown out, whether by elections or otherwise, right? But so in effect, we don't need to promise them outside. These are promises that any politician, you know, health, water, stable financial sector, these are promises that politicians should undertake on behalf of their own population, right?
Good, thank you. So, our tax inversions problem? Oh yes, oh yes. So, of course, every time you have a rule, a lawyer will figure out a way to go around the rule, or an accountant will find another way around the different way. So yeah, of course, you know, and so there's a couple of solutions to that. One is allow the problem to present itself. So that, oh, now we see, oh, look what we've done. And once it becomes a worldwide problem, then we have to take the next step, and the next step is more radical, and that is to where's the real pressure? Well, it's that the shareholders are in the developed world. And so now you're talking about full-on follow-through, which I know that's very scary, and nobody really wants to talk about that. But if you consider that the reason that I like the status quo for Apple and the mining companies and so on, is that the more profits in that multinational, the more in my pension fund. If I can't myself personally benefit that way, then I start to notice the problem a little bit more. So I think inversion is for sure a problem. Anytime you try to tamp down, it's like whack-a-mole. Anytime you try to do one thing right, you know, you've got armies trying to figure out a different way. So yeah, but sometimes the act of bringing that to the surface, that's what's going on anyway. Now it's going to go on globally. What are you talking about? All the headquarters in the world are in Switzerland. That's not possible. Now we have to go another way, and perhaps BEPS is the answer to that. And then I would say, just although it wasn't directed at me, I think the question about how do you approach Zambia with these proposals? How do you convince Zambia to change? For me, it's always the wrong question. I I don't think that unless we change the incentives, unless we change the economic pressures, the exogenous pressures, there's not much, for me personally, I wouldn't tell Zambia to do anything because I don't know how you can stand up and say, I'm going to be the first one to take a step. The U.S. doesn't want to take a step. We are the richest, you are the richest country in the world, and you won't take a tiny little step toward, for example, the Common Reporting Standard. Not a tiny little step toward BEPS, kicking and screaming the whole way on BEPS. And as you say, reserving value at the level of the OECD, these sort of pernicious technical ways that we protect our stake in this game, that's offensive. That's way more offensive, I think, than the government faced with this economic pressure to cave. Of course you're going to cave. I'm going to cave. Canada caves. I mean, you know, whoever's not kind of driving the train kind of has to ride in the car. And so I think all these are important. I don't dispute any of them. Just from my perspective, unless we take issue with the real source of the problem, the drivers, the suppliers, you know, then I don't know that other conversation really makes much sense to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all of the panelists, everyone for your fantastic interventions, and also everyone else for your attention. So.